Hello, my name is Walter Pierce. I am the minister here at the Lakeview Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois. One of the hobbies that I enjoy is reading. I know it's kind of nerdy, I guess, but I thought in light of the political season, I'd share some of the books that I'm reading or that I hope to read, um, just to basically help discern our political witness as Christians. So today I'm going to share six books that I'm hoping to read, that I'm currently reading, and then a bonus kind of contrarian book that has a slightly different view than some of the ones I'm reading right now. I'm dividing them into three groups of two based on my own kind of personal discernment. Anyways, the first group of two is a book. These are both kind of classics in terms of looking at politics and engagement and Christianity. But the first is by John Howard Yoder, who's a former professor at Notre Dame. It's called The Politics of Jesus, and The Upside Down Kingdom by Donald Kraybill. Both of these books provide a broad perspective of the life of Jesus and his declaration of a new kingdom based not on power but on humility. Politics, the discussions around politics are a lot like the discussions of that Jesus had about kingdoms and the idea of what claims our heart and what claims that politicians often make. They're making political kingdom-like claims. They're claiming a certain reign and realm in our and rule in our hearts. And so when Jesus talks about kingdoms, he's really speaking political language. And particularly a prescient chapter in Politics of Jesus is the chapter on revolutionary subordination, which is very different posture than many of our politicians and those who are in power have. And he calls for a active, willing, active service and submission rather than a sort of passive service and submission based on coercion and imposition. And we know that Jesus set the standard and example for that in John chapter 13, when he willingly, not through coercion, not through being imposed upon, but he willingly washed the feet of the disciples. So both of those books are very good at sort of laying out the kingdom of God and what it looks like and what Jesus was speaking about when he spoke about the kingdom and how that is really political language that speaks to the political, social, and economic realities of the world at that time. The second two are kind of both deal with political engagement. The first one is a short book by Vincent Bacote, I believe is how he pronounces his name, called The Political Disciple. And the second book is a book by David Koyzis called Political Visions and Illusions. So Bacote basically argues that this little book here, that political engagement is an aspect of our public discipleship and public faithfulness to God. So we are called as Christians to be in the public square. He calls us to pursue holiness in the public square, that we just can't run and hide away from the political scene. That this is part of a place where we can express and be disciples of Jesus. The Koyzis book is pretty helpful as well, as far as being a survey and a critique of different of various contemporary political and economic ideologies, and really how those ideologies can often become idolatrous. That we can become more committed to democracy or to capitalism or to socialism or to liberalism or conservatism. We can become more loyal to those things than we are to the gospel. And so he looks at those ideologies and argues for a sort of Christian pluralism on top of that to help us transcend our sort of ideological desires and our desires to sort of be led by certain ideologies rather than by the gospel of Jesus Christ. The final two books that I'm looking at are both very, very recent. The first is a book called Compassion and Conviction. It's by Justin Giboney, Michael Ware, and Chris Butler. They're all a part of an organization called the AND Campaign. The AND is kind of their tagline is they believe in biblical values and social justice. And so kind of the title Compassion and Conviction, the conviction being the biblical values, the compassion being social justice, that how can we as Christians engage faithfully in civic affairs and in political affairs. And so they give some very helpful ideas on how to do that. One of the things that I think is helpful particularly is their focus really less on the national scene and more on sort of what are some local ways that we can engage in these topics. And finally, I'm looking at a book called The Liturgy of Politics. It's a particular book that is kind of the idea of, it's written by Kaitlyn Schiess is how she pronounces her name. And her argument is that basically oftentimes our politics are shaped by the practices that the church engages in, that we engage in personally. And then so she's calling really for a return to some of our spiritual practices, spiritual formation practices, especially with regards to confession and practices of critique to help reshape kind of our view of sort of how we enter into the political sphere. So those are the 6 books that I'm looking at. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a seventh one, which I said is kind of a counter narrative. It's by John Mark Hicks. It is a book entitled Resisting Babel. It's about the legacy of David Lipscomb in Churches of Christ specifically. One of the things he thought was, especially after the Civil War, he became an advocate for pacifism and political non-engagement. His argument was that politics just gets us driven into nationalism and more focused on patriotism and sort of nationalistic ideas and not really focused on the kingdom of God. So hopefully one of those titles has spurred your interest. I'll try to include them in some comments in case you didn't remember all the titles. I'm looking forward to hearing any insight or comments that you may have about each of these books. I'd love to discuss and exchange ideas about them and see which ones have been helpful, or some other titles that would be helpful to helping us as Christians give a good, healthy, faithful political witness. So please leave your comments below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Lakeview Church YouTube channel, for additional discussions like this, hopefully, and also sermons and some of our worship services as well. So happy reading. Look forward to hearing from you. Take care and God bless.